This is americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for stand-up Democrats. I'm your host, Jim Cuddy. Melanne Verveer was the first U.S. ambassador for women's issues, and she has some thoughts about the economic power that women have, both locally and globally. Fred Harris was a United States Senator, chair of the Democratic Party, and a member of the Kerner Commission on Racial Violence. He has some strong views about the issues of race and immigration that are still dividing the nation. And Jimmy Williams, sitting in for Bill Press, talks with reporter Jackie Kucinich about Hillary Clinton. Are you tired of Tea Party Republicans and Rush Limbaugh dominating the airwaves? Do you want the facts you won't get on Fox or even on CNN? Then stay tuned. Our sponsor, 21st Century Democrats, works hard to get everyday Democrats involved in returning our party to its roots and to success at the ballot box. Sit back and listen, then stand up and fight. And follow 21st Century Democrats on Facebook for all the latest progressive news. We're glad you can join us. The country's first ambassador at large for global women's issues, Melanne Verveer, explains how women's economic power goes beyond just consumer spending. And we say hello to Melanne Verveer, Executive Director of Georgetown University's Institute for Women, Peace, and Security. She served as the first U.S. ambassador at large for global women's issues and is co-author with Kim Azzarelli of the new book, Fast Forward, How Women Can Achieve Power and Purpose. Ambassador Melanne Verveer, thank you so much for joining us today on americasdemocrats.org.
It's my pleasure.
So the book's title, Fast Forward, sounds a little like Sheryl Sandberg's Lean In. Did she have an effect on this book?
Well, Lean In obviously ignited a conversation that goes on to today about women and their careers, and it has clearly resonated with millions of readers. Fast Forward takes the next step, if you will. It is about showing women how we can accelerate our growing power wherever we find ourselves across the sectors and use that power for purpose to better the world. And we're particularly interested in how that power for purpose can be used to exponentially grow progress for women and girls around the world. So it's essentially about embracing power to affect change. And to that end, we believe that we're at an historic moment when more women and men are recognizing women's potential to fast forward us to the kind of world I think all of us want to see. And what is factoring that or driving that is the fact that today we find more and more women in positions of power and responsibility. We also have a plethora of research and data that makes the evidence-based case about how women grow economies and create social progress. And it is far easier than ever before through technological means, through social media, through all kinds of ways and means to connect with each other, with like-minded people who can help come together in ways to move progress forward. So it is about essentially seizing the moment, using our capacities wherever we find ourselves to really create a better world, especially for greater progress for women and girls.
Now, as I mentioned, you were the first U.S. global ambassador for women and a close friend of then Secretary of State Hillary Clinton. Is it accurate to say you were her point person for empowering women around the world?
Well, she was really critical in doing that, obviously, as the secretary, but as the ambassador appointed by the president for the first time in this country, my main charge was to integrate these issues, to bring the perspective of women, to bring their participation into that range of issues that the State Department grapples with. We know that no country can get ahead if it leaves half of its people behind. We know that we cannot solve some of the global challenges that confront all of us, from growing our economies to creating jobs, to creating greater inclusive prosperity, climate change, security and peace issues. We know in those societies, for example, where women's rights are denied and oppression is exerted, those societies are linked closely with instability and conflict. So the recognition was these are issues we have to pay greater attention to, but in a way that is integrated into everything we do. So that if I were working in an embassy, working on economic issues at the State Department, on economic statecraft, working in the multilateral dimensions through international organizations, working in an area that focuses on how to ameliorate conflict and create stability. These are considerations that should be part of the work that we do. And to that end, it's really about enabling us to be more effective in the goals that we want to achieve. And of course, Secretary Clinton was the premier ambassador on these issues. She has focused consistently on these issues throughout her time as First Lady. I think everyone recalls her historic speech at the 4th UN World Conference on Women that took place in Beijing. We have just observed the 20th anniversary of that global event. As senator, she spent time on these issues when she would travel, rarely as she did, out of the country in those years, whether to Afghanistan or to Iraq. She always sat down with the women because she knew that their participation was critical to the potential for a sustainable peace. And then, of course, as secretary, she elevated these issues in ways that took the collective work of the United States to a greater level in foreign policy.
We're speaking with Melanne Verveer, Executive Director of Georgetown University's Institute for Women, Peace, and Security, a co-author with Kim Mazzarelli of the new book, Fast Forward, How Women Can Achieve Power and Purpose. Ambassador, advertisers have known for a long time that women spend a lot of money, but your book says that women have an economic influence beyond just consumer purchases. How exactly does that work?
Oh, Jim, that's such a great question because I do think that increasingly advertisers recognize this. In fact, it wasn't always the case that companies really inserted the role of women throughout their operations in ways that would enable it to take advantage of the purchasing power of women. Today, we know that purchasing power is growing. It's in the trillions of dollars, over 20 trillion and growing. And it's something that anybody who looks at their bottom line needs to take into consideration. But your question, I think, goes even more significantly into the role of women in growing economies. And this is where we've got a plethora of data and research today that shows that women's economic participation, when it can equal that of male participation in a given country, GDP can grow significantly. The way we see women spending their income has a multiplier effect. It has an exponential growth component, if you will, because women plow their incomes back into their families, into their communities, and that has the effect of raising the standard of living. We know that women entrepreneurs, women-owned businesses, particularly small and medium-sized businesses, what the World Bank calls that missing middle in economic growth in our country, small and medium-sized businesses have been that great locomotive for economic growth. Well, in the United States, women entrepreneurs are growing 1.5 times faster than the national average. And I think just to put this in perspective, if we were a country, if women entrepreneurs in the United States were a country, their GDP would be close to that of Germany's. So we're talking about a tremendous potential in terms of creating greater growth and all of the benefits that come with that in terms of jobs and attendant prosperity. So today you have, for example, approximately 9 million women-owned businesses employing about 7.9 million people. So take this away, where would we be? grow it, imagine where we could be. So you're exactly right. This area does have a lot to do with the clout of women's purchasing power, and that is something companies certainly pay attention to. But everybody has to pay attention to the fact that if we want to grow our economies and create jobs, and I don't know any country that doesn't want to do that, and any company that wants to grow its bottom line, it is critically important to really understand what this represents. And just in the last couple weeks, McKinsey and Company's Institute put out a very comprehensive gender parity study that showed that economies could grow significantly if gender parity became the reality, between $12 and $28 trillion. So this is not a small matter. This is a matter that we all have to consider if we want to unlock the kind of economic potential I think we all want to see.
Yeah, and you quote former World Bank President Robert Zoller as saying gender equality is smart economics. So how do we get there? Because there's clearly still a great divide in this country.
Well, it's not just the divide. It's the fact that I don't think we keenly enough recognize how important this is. I mean, fundamentally, many of us, if not all of us, who care about women's progress are driven by the fact that this is the right thing to do. It is a moral imperative. Women's rights are human rights, the same rights as everyone. As men enjoy, women should enjoy fully. But we also know today that this is also the smart thing to do and the strategic thing to do. And that's what the former president of the World Bank was saying. This is smart economics. Gender equality is smart economics. And the World Economic Forum, which nobody accuses of being a women's organization, is that organization that brings together some of the great economic thinkers of the world. They put out an annual gender gap report. Now, they don't put that report out for the same reasons an organization primarily focused on women would put out a report. They put it out because they know and they show by the analysis they do of every country for which data exists that in those countries where men and women are closer to being equal, where the gap between them in terms of access to health and education and economic participation and political participation is closer to being closed, those countries are far more prosperous and economically competitive. So I think today we are growing in our understanding, whether we're a government, whether we're a company, whether we're anybody who wants to see this kind of prosperity unleashed in the world, where we do have to focus on women's participation.
And before we let you go, you and co-author Kim Azzarelli advise women on how to ignite their potential based on 3 simple steps. What are those?
Well, they basically are about understanding where it is we sit. You don't have to be a CEO or a senior partner. Wherever we sit in the spectrum of our work, or even if we work inside the home, we need to know the power that we can bring to bear. And once we understand what it is we can do, we should look to find our purpose, which is the meaning beyond ourselves, beyond our self-interest, and then connect with others who are like-minded in wanting also to participate in making a difference in however that is manifested, to bringing their passions and interests together. And what we include in the book is a toolkit that each person, each reader can go through in walking through various steps that enable one to know her power, find her purpose, and then connect with others in hopes of creating that kind of world I think we all want to see.
Okay. Melanne Verveer, Executive Director of Georgetown University's Institute for Women, Peace, and Security, and co-author with Kim Azzarelli of the new book, Fast Forward, How Women Can Achieve Power and Purpose. Ambassador Verveer, thank you so much for your time with us today on americasdemocrats.org. We'd love to have you back again soon.
Well, thank you so much. I enjoyed it.
Thank you. And this is americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for Stand Up Democrats. We want you to sit back and listen, but we need you to stand up and fight. Do you want to get involved and help get our party back to its roots and to success at the ballot box? You can make your contribution to Democrats for America's Future and help us keep this show going and to elect Democrats who will stand up for democratic principles. Go to americasdemocrats.org and click on Donate at the top of the page. This is americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for Stand Up Democrats. Former Senator Fred Harris says limiting immigration means we're losing the assets of energy and talent that would help our own economy. We'll talk to him more about that in just a moment. Right now, we turn to Jim Hightower, America's #1 populist, for his common sense commentary.
It's Cyber Monday. Get out there and buy stuff. But you don't actually have to go anywhere, for this gimmicky shop, shop, shop day lures us to consume without leaving home or even getting out of bed. Concocted by Amazon, the online marketing monopolist, Cyber Monday is a knockoff of Black Friday. Just another ploy by Amazon CEO Jeff Bezos to siphon sales from real stores. Seems innocent, but behind Amazon's online convenience and discounted prices is a predatory business model based on exploitation of workers, bullying of suppliers, dodging of taxes, and use of crude anti-competitive force against America's Main Street businesses. A clue into Amazon's ethics came when Bezos instructed his staff to get ever-cheaper prices from small business suppliers by stalking them, quote, the way a cheetah would pursue a sickly gazelle. Jeff Crandall, who owns Old Town Bike Shop in Colorado Springs, is one who's under attack. He offers fair prices, provides good jobs, pays rent and taxes, lives in and supports the community. But he's noticed that more and more shoppers come in to try out bikes and get advice, yet not buy anything. Instead, their smartphones scan the barcode of the bike they want, then they go online to purchase it from Amazon cheaper than Crandall's wholesale price. You see, the cheetah is a multi-billion-dollar-a-year beast that can sell that bike at a loss, then make up the loss on sales of the thousands of other products it peddles. This is Jim Hightower saying this amounts to corporate murder of small business. And yes, it's illegal. But Amazon is doing it every day in practically every community. So on this Cyber Monday, let's pledge to buy from local businesses that support our communities. For information, go to American Independent Business Alliance at www.amiba.net.
Need an antidote to the progressive blues? Want some good news about how grassroots folks are rebelling against the corporate powers and winning? Well, here's an easy-to-swallow pill for you, the Hightower Lowdown. Hightower's monthly newsletter will give you the lowdown, even as it lifts you up. It's 4 pages a month, jam-packed with facts you can use, actions you can take, and Jim's own Texas humor, all for only $15 a year. To become a lowdowner, go to hightowerlowdown.org.
This is americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for Stand Up Democrats. Former Senator Fred Harris says Donald Trump is acting against the interest of the United States by opposing immigration and sets the record straight about who the so-called illegal immigrants really are. And we say hello to Fred Harris, professor of political science at the University of New Mexico, former senator from Oklahoma, former candidate for president, and former member of the National Advisory Commission on Civil Disorders. He is outspoken in defense of Native American and immigrant rights and continues to be a leader in promoting progressive causes. Fred Harris, thank you so much for joining us today on americasdemocrats.org.
You bet. Good to be here.
Always nice to have you with us. You are the only surviving member of the Kerner Commission appointed by President Johnson to investigate the causes of urban rioting that swept the nation almost 50 years ago. The violence was disturbing, of course, but urban and economic conditions have not always improved. Could we see violence like we saw then again?
Well, I hope not. And I should say this, that on the Kerner Commission, nearly 50 years ago now, as you said, we conducted a great many of field meetings and hearings and so forth, and we also hired some excellent consultants. And one group at Brandeis, we commissioned to do a study, actually to come up with a test that they could apply to cities to see whether or not riots were imminent in those cities. And they came up with a test with a number of criteria, I think something like 12 criteria, had to do with unemployment and police, community relations, and so forth, data that was available. And then they applied that test to 9 cities, some like, say, Watts in Los Angeles, that had a riot in 1965 but not in 67. Some like Washington, D.C. and Baltimore, where it was thought there never would be riots because there was a large middle-class African-American group. Later on, incidentally, those two had riots in 68. And some cities where it was thought that riots were about to occur. And what they came up with, the test, which was a good test, came up with this result. There were about to be riots in all of those cities. We first thought something wrong with the test, but we came to the conclusion that hostilities were so high in all of those places that they could erupt into violence. So we didn't know why violence occurred in one place and not another, but we could describe with particularity the conditions that existed in the places where the riots had occurred. And so we thought, if you're going to prevent riots in the future, you had to get at the deeper causes, and that's still true today.
Mm-hmm. Now, after the New Deal and the Great Society raised so many people out of poverty, why have things seemingly gone backwards, at least in terms of income inequality?
Well, I think a lot of reasons, but one is the power of money in campaigns. It has just become really extreme, that problem. And another thing is that there was a kind of a reaction that was a little slow in coming to they appealed by the Democratic Party and Democratic candidates on the basis of moral duty. So, George McGovern, I loved him, and may his memory be a blessing. But he and his supporters made a kind of a New Deal pitch saying we ought to do right by poor people and by women and by young people and by African Americans and other minorities because it is our moral duty, because it's the right thing to do. I think that it's far more effective to say we ought to do it because it's in your interest too, Mr. Harris, like my dad, a lot of white working class people who've left the party. And we didn't do enough of that, and we need to do it now. And we need to explain things. For example, the Affordable Care Act. We've got a lot of people that say, well, I've got health insurance. Why do we need this Affordable Care Act? And what we've got to say is, for example, right now, there are a lot of people who don't have health insurance that are going to the emergency rooms and so forth, and your taxes are having to pay for that. And for example, on minimum wage, people say, "Well, I'm already making more than the minimum wage. What do I care about raising the minimum wage?" Well, 2 or 3 things. One is if Walmart and some of these places, these fast food places, keep paying substandard wages, people that people can't live on, you're going to have to make up the difference through your taxes in their cost of living. You're going to provide food stamps and subsidized housing and Medicaid and so forth. It'd be much better if by their own work they were able to earn enough to make a living. We've got, and we can also say that the minimum wages won't just raise the wages at the bottom; it'll sort of bump them up upstairs as well. So I think we've got to make clear, and this is something we weren't able to do back in the time of the Kerner report. We've got to make clear that it's in everybody's interest to see that people have a chance to make a living by work, and we've got to be sure that they have jobs. I just wanted to add on this. We reported we finished our report on the Kerner report back in 1968 in March, and we planned to have a whole week to background members of the press about the details about why did we say racism and also why doing something about it was in the interest of everybody, including white working class people. And we didn't get that opportunity because somebody released the report to the Washington Post, I think with evil intent, and the Washington Post couldn't be talked out of reporting it, and so we released it to everybody at the same time, and it just caused absolute chaos in the media. I got a call, I recall that night, from an AP reporter who said to me, I have a 30-minute deadline. Can you just sort of capsulize what the Kerner report says? And so what came out was the headlines everywhere were white racism cause of riots, Kerner Commission says. And that was sort of basically true, but why we said that and what the conditions were and why it was in the interest of everybody to do something about it, we never were able to get across as much as we should have.
It sounds like how people take their news nowadays. They read the headlines and don't bother reading the full story. Interesting. I want to switch to another topic. Yeah, I want to switch to another topic that you work on. You're very close to immigration. Despite the polarizing rhetoric coming out of the Republican presidential candidates, do you think some movement on reform is possible in Congress, or will we have to wait for the outcome of the presidential election?
I think on most of this, we're going to have to wait till and that is on inequality of income, on immigration, on racism and so forth, until the presidential election. But I think the election period itself, I hope it can, will help us get across the facts to people and why their own self-interest is involved in doing something about it. We've got the military, for example, in the United States. They have realized that global warming offers some very serious national security problems for us, and they know we've got to do something about it. It's in the interest of this country and everybody. And you've got some of the major global corporations who are coming around to that. I think people will more and more see their self-interest in doing something about global warming, despite the sort of science deniers in the Republican Party. I think the same is true about inequality of income and about racism. When you've got this whole group of people, a growing number of people and percentage of people who are in poverty, we've got some 45 million people who are poor today. That's about a little over 15% of our population, for goodness sakes. 1 in 4 children are poor. Henry Ford, a long time ago, saw that he wasn't going to be able to sell these Model Ts unless workers were making enough money to buy them. And that's true today. And it's very hard to get the economy back on its feet when you've got this growing number of people who have dropped out of the middle class and increased the numbers of people who are poor. So I think more and more we're going to have to help people see that doing something about these problems, and that includes immigration as well, are in the interests of all of us. We've got 11 or 12 million people here living in the shadows in this country without documents, and they are mistreated. They often are paid, most of them, a wage you can't live on, pulling down the economy, pulling down wages generally, and we're losing the great assets we have there in their energies and in their talents. And we ought to legalize, regularize their presence here, giving them a pathway to citizenship, and that will be a real boost to our economy. It'll be helpful to everybody.
And this is what I don't understand, why so many Republican elected officials are so uniformly against immigrants when most of the public and much of the business community welcomes them. So it doesn't really make a lot of sense. And the other side of that, too, is it's not like these folks are just coming to America because they can. They're running away from something. Drug wars, corruption, all sorts of stuff that they'd rather take their chances practically being abused here. It seems. That doesn't make sense.
That's it. That's absolutely true. And I was so pleased to hear the Pope say that this south to north migration is going to continue in the world. It is here. And that these are human beings who are looking for better lives, who want to work, and we ought to think about them not as numbers, as he said, but as human beings. I wrote a book that's an e-book called These People Want to Work, and in researching for it, I interviewed about a dozen women, undocumented women, immigrants from Mexico, and learned their individual stories. These are such good people, hard-working people. They weren't able to make a living where they were in Mexico, and they're working now at substandard wages. But the studies all show, as it does with those people, that they are an actual boost to the local economy. And unlike what people say, well, they're responsible for all this crime and so forth, that's not true. Studies show that, for example, in a city like El Paso, Texas, where there are very high numbers of undocumented people, there's a very low crime rate. So all these myths and things, people like Donald Trump firing up people and against these immigrants, particularly those from Mexico, are wrong and are against our own interests to believe in and act on those kinds of charges.
Well, you know, and the way I see it too, Fred, is if one person who happens to be a quote-unquote illegal immigrant commits a crime, that's all anybody talks about. You're not talking about the entire immigrant population. The focus is always on that one person or those few people, and that's not fair either.
No, that absolutely isn't. And here's what's weird too, is Trump and people like that keep talking about, well, let's build that fence more and so forth. That's really, you're not going to be able to do that effectively. But more than that, a majority, a rather strong majority, of the people who are in this country right now without documents did not come across the border. They flew by airline into the United States. They came legally with documents, with visas or whatever, and then overstayed their visa limit, and that's and nothing that Trump and them are talking about does it. Today, the immigration from Mexico has slowed to a trickle, and most of these undocumented people, or most immigrants generally, now coming from Asia. We need these people. We are not reproducing ourselves in the United States. We're not in as bad a shape in the fertility decline as most other developed countries in the world. Japan, for example, is in terrible trouble because of their declining population. And the only way we're increasing in population in the United States and keeping this some feasible ratio between those who are employed and those who are old people is through the people who come here as immigrants and their descendants. We need them. We need to set standards of bringing in people to the degree we need them, and we do need them. And we also need to bring the people who are here already, working hard, paying their taxes, and staying within the law. We need to get them out of the shadows.
Amen. Fred Harris, professor of political science at the University of New Mexico, former senator from Oklahoma, joining us today on americasdemocrats.org. Fred, as always, thank you so much for your time with us today. We do look forward to having you back again soon.
Thank you.
You're quite welcome. This is americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for Stand Up Democrats. We want you to sit back and listen, but we need you to stand up and fight. Help get our party back to its roots and to success at the ballot box. Make your contribution to Democrats for America's Future to keep this show on the air and help elect stand-up Democrats. Go to americasdemocrats.org and click on Donate at the top of the page. This is americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for stand-up Democrats. And now, reporter Jackie Kucinich with the latest on Hillary Clinton in an interview with Jimmy Williams on The Bill Press Show.
Guess who is in the house, ladies and gentlemen? Jackie Kucinich. Alan is here.
Hello, how are you?
I'm fine, darling.
Sorry, I was caught in traffic because, of course, why wouldn't there be traffic in D.C. right before Thanksgiving?
Right.
Because that makes sense.
Right. You would think that people would actually, take the week off. No, not so much.
No, not
right.
so much.
Not so much. So Jackie is with the Daily Beast. She's the senior politics editor over there. We've known each other for a long time. You can follow her on Twitter at JF Kucinich. I'll spell that for you. JFKUCINICH. And then you can also find it at dailybeast.com. And she's my buddy. So, Jackie.
Yes.
You wrote a very interesting piece on Hillary Clinton.
Yeah, she's starting to get into some of the policy pieces of her platform.
Right.
And so this one has to do
real policy.
Real policy.
Craziness.
I know. It seems to be a fleeting thing these days. But she was talking this weekend about elder care, which doesn't sound terribly sexy, but a lot of people whose parents are getting up there have to deal with this. We've both had friends who've had to take care of sick parents, take time off work. And so what this would do, and it's funny, I've had this conversation with Republicans and Democrats. This affects everybody.
Yeah.
And so this particular policy would give them a tax I don't want to say credit. I'm trying to think of what
a tax deduction.
Deduction, yes. Thank you. I'm like, it's not
a tax benefit.
A tax benefit, and that you get to write off up to $6,000 of expenses when you have to take care of a sick parent or a sick family member. And so it's something that it's actually there's a bill in the Senate that has sort of been sitting there.
Yeah.
Not Claire McCaskill. Amy Klobuchar and Barbara Mikulski are leading the way on this. And you have to wonder, there's lots of things going on in the Senate, but this hasn't really gone anywhere yet. So we'll have to see if it actually ends up.
Now, does the Mikulski Klobuchar bill, is that the $6,000 tax benefit?
Yes, it is.
Well, then it's probably going nowhere since Hillary Clinton just endorsed it.
Well, pretty much.
Right. not to put too fine a point on it.
Well, no. Things like this you find get put into larger bills.
Right. So maybe this will end up, because this is a bipartisan problem, if there is some kind of groundswell, or if there is if they get a Republican on this, which isn't beyond it is the Senate. It is still the Senate. Yeah.
As you know, you worked in the Senate. Bipartisanship still does exist there in dark corners no one talks about.
Shh, don't say that. Ted Cruz might try to fake filibuster it.
Right.
Oh, my gosh. Well, listen, look, my mother is not 45 anymore. Mm-hmm. If I say her age, she'll kill me.
Yeah, you will die.
Right, yeah. and she still thinks she's 45, but she's not 45. But, the deal I made with my mother is that I'd never put her in a home. Mm-hmm. And I said, look, you got it. Listen, it's up to you when you want to die, basically. Unless you get hit by a car. Don't walk in the street, Mother. But she lives in the middle of nowhere, right? And so I'm like, look, this is the end of your life. These are your best years. You determine this. But when you get to the point where you can't do what you got to do, then I'm going to have to bring in somebody to take care of you because you live 400 miles away from me.
Right.
And if I can get a $6,000 tax benefit for that, you daggum right I'm going to do it. And my mother's a Republican.
Right. Well, right. And all you need to do is watch any cable network to realize what a big problem this is becoming or what a big issue this is, because every other commercial is what to do with old parents, essentially. It's saying, I think one's called A Place for Mom, which it was just horrible. I'm sorry. I'm sure it's wonderful. I'm sure it's a wonderful place for your parents to live, but it's just... I'm sure it's a wonderful place for your parents to live.
A place for Mom, Mount Hope Cemetery.
Yeah, it just on its face kind of sounds horrible, but I'm sure it's a lovely place for your parents to live. But you see this every other
elderly lesbian care, right? There's no men allowed, right? Exactly.
But you see all of these ads, you see all these commercials on cable, and you know that people are dealing with this every single day, and they have to take time off work, and not all employers are okay with that.
Right.
And a lot of the time, when you look at, there was a great, I'm losing where this report was, but it's also a lot of women, which Hillary Clinton talked about,
right, that
end up taking time off to take care of elderly parents. So that's another place that Hillary Clinton obviously wants to cultivate that base.
And, you know, it's interesting because in the 2008 campaign, when Hillary was running against President Obama, then Senator Obama, you know, she downplayed the woman part of the campaign. This time she has wholly embraced it. I think we can all agree on that. And I think that, you know, she's really going, you know, head in on this and saying, appealing to women, more of which are becoming independent voters these days as opposed to Democrats versus Republicans. Well, women determine elections. We know this.
Right.
If women show up, you know, for the most part, Democrats win. If women don't show up and old white men show up, you know, Republicans win. We know the demographic data here. But if she can appeal to women and say, here's the deal, you know, you are in this group of people, or you're going to be taking care of your mom or your dad, this has broad appeal.
Absolutely. But I do think her emphasizing the fact that she is a woman, it can also backfire, because I think talking about the next story that we're going to speak about, she started going after Bernie Sanders by implying that he was sexist. And, I just personally have a problem with just throwing that around, because there is a lot of sexism out there.
Sure.
And when you're saying that because someone said that, when you listen to the context of what Bernie Sanders said about yelling about gun safety, it doesn't scream sexism to me anyway. And I just think you have to be very careful about throwing that around, because in the workplace, in everyday life, a lot of women deal with that.
Yeah.
And it's a lot more overt.
Yeah.
And there are these buzzwords, shrill, and none of that happened in terms of, when she was in the debate. Bernie Sanders said yelling about gun control doesn't really do anything. That, at least maybe I didn't take away of that because I'm a reporter, but it didn't say that to me.
Yeah.
But it seems like she's changed strategies on Bernie Sanders. So.
Well, she has changed strategy on Bernie Sanders. She's ignoring him for all intents and purposes.
Right.
And I mean, Amy Chozick, our friend from the New York Times, has written a fantastic piece. Hillary Clinton looks past primaries into Republicans in strategy to beat Sanders. And my understanding from the Sanders people is they're furious that she's not engaging with him, that she is acting like he's not even there.
That's what you do when you're winning.
Right.
Honestly, I mean, you don't mention their name. Why give them the satisfaction?
Right.
I mean, you saw someone asked her about Martin O'Malley's attacks on her, and she said, I'm not going to talk about that. Because she doesn't have to. She doesn't have to address these guys. And when Bernie Sanders was closer to her in the polls, when he was gaining on her in Iowa,
yeah,
sure, she had to address him. He was coming close to her. Now she's something like 20 points ahead in Iowa.
Right.
Why would she say his
50,
name?
60 points in South Carolina.
Right.
I mean, it's ridiculous.
Exactly.
Yeah. Right.
She's pulling away. Now, that doesn't mean it's over.
Not at all.
We've all seen the movie where Hillary Clinton is up and then she's not.
Or Bill Clinton.
Or Bill Clinton.
Right.
And, the trust issue is still out there. It hasn't gone away. That said, Bernie Sanders, for whatever reason, is falling behind now.
I think it's foreign policy. I think that
it's a big part of it.
The Turkey just downed a Russian plane.
Yeah.
This is not going away. What's happening over abroad, if you will, across the pond. Donald Trump and his campaign staff.
Yeah.
What's going on with this telling reporters? I mean, did the First Amendment just go away for the Trump campaign? Or I'm wondering.
I mean, so it is not uncommon when you're on the campaign trail and you're a reporter to have to be in a pen.
Right. It's normal.
Well, it's normal, especially when there is Secret Service involved. Yeah. You've got to go through magnometers. You've got to have all of your gear scanned. Yep. It's common, and.
Because all those terrorist reporters, right?
Well, I mean, it depends on who you're talking to.
That's true. That's a good point. That's a good point.
But it is that is common. But the way the Trump campaign seems to be handling this, it seems to have gotten pretty serious fast. I haven't been out on the trail with Trump, but it seems like a lot of reporters are getting yelled at, are not allowed to talk to the people in the crowd, which is pretty unusual, frankly. When that happens, the odd time that happened in the Romney campaign, usually they relinquished after you talked to them and said, this is part of my job. Why wouldn't I want to talk to people in the crowd? So, or what are you afraid of? What are they going to say?
Right.
At this point in the campaign,
Get out of my country. That's what they're going to say.
well, but you know this is unusual this early in the campaign, and so that's what I think is so disturbing, and just the tone. I mean, I heard the audio of some of the Trump staffers yelling at the press. Again, I wasn't there, but it's a little harsh. There still is some respect between operatives and reporters, and that should be maintained. You know, things get chippy. It happens, but
Chippy that's a new word. Yeah,
I like chippy.
Chippy.
Yeah, I like
chippy.
Oh, I like that.
That's all for americasdemocrats.org. Thank you to all who made today's show possible. Melanne Verveer, Fred Harris, and the entire Bill Press team. And thank you for listening. If you liked what you heard, please get involved in our efforts to keep this show going and to elect Democrats who are bringing the party back to its roots. Go to americasdemocrats.org and click on Donate at the top of the page. And be sure to find 21st Century Democrats on Facebook. For americasdemocrats.org, I'm your host, Jim Cuddy. We want you to sit back and listen, but we need you to stand up and fight. Join us, support the show, and help elect Democrats who will stand up for democratic principles with your contribution today. Go to americasdemocrats.org and click on Donate.